They're like 50 words, and you're like, we
Hey, Kevin.
make dance.
We do dance and it's fun. This is my
Right.
room. This is my windows. This is Henry, my plant.
Henry.
Hey, Henry.
And we have Cheryl. Henry meets
Cheryl.
Cheryl. Cheryl meets Henry.
Okay, so let's start a little bit now. Let's go ahead and dive in. Hi, everybody who's joined us. Just to introduce to you, this is Nattie and Hollis, Nattie Trogdon and Hollis Bartlett. Nattie and Hollis are makers, performers, teachers, and partners focusing on form and function of the body, the anatomical and the fantastical. They have been presented at Gibney Duo Multicultural Arts Center, Jack Crystal Theater, First Look at Brooklyn Ballet, the No Theme Festival in Poughkeepsie, New York, the School for Contemporary Dance and Thought, MAD Festival, Earth Dance, and Triskelion Arts. They've been artists in residence at the Dance Complex, Peaceable Barn, The Floor on Atlantic, and NYU Tisch Dance. As educators, and they co-facilitate open classes and workshops throughout the city and at various universities. They're graduates of NYU Tisch and Purchase, respectively, receiving their BFAs in dance performances. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, I'm excited to see where our conversation takes us. You guys are people I've sort of looked at from afar for a long time. So tell me what you mean when you talk about how you see dance as anatomical and fantastical. It sounds like a really juicy jumping off point.
Cool.
Where to start?
Yeah.
I think we both have a real fascination with anatomy and biomechanics and sort of the way that the body functions and moves, both coming from big conservatories. I feel like neither one of us got a lot of anatomical training. And so it's been something that we've both sort of dove into post-grad. I also feel like our personalities are sort of this we're like opposites and we balance each other out, like the poetic and the practical. And as much as we love the body and its function and anatomy and how things work and what it looks like and how it feels, we also love the narrative and the storytelling and all of that within dance. So it's sort of this combining of the poetic and the practical, the functional and the fantastical.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is just thinking, we really like to think of the body as a tool, as an instrument, really kind of researching what this container is that we have and the way that it works. And, we study with a lot of people who share that same anatomical sense. The woman that's here as KJ Holmes, love her so much, and she does a lot of work of the systems of the body, thinking about how the skin works, how the muscles work, how the bones work, the fluid in the body, the nervous system, and so a lot of that has kind of been folded into our practice of really researching this container that we are creating within, and then as Nattie said, the poetics of it, not getting stuck, because there's also a way to get these are just the way my bones work, or trying to find how to use those systems, to kind of poetically speak to what is the human experience.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like that's something that's really prominent right now, should we say. There's a push to consider the body as a somatic experience and to consider the state of being of the body as the worthwhile research or the worthwhile performance state of it. And I think it's really interesting. I come from a very Gaga based landscape, and it feels like the language you use is often very similar, which is very interesting to hear about, especially talking about the layer of flesh and then the skin, the bones, the muscle, the fluid that's in your body. These are words that we use all the time.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about also then the dance training that we both had growing up, and I come from a studio and did some jazz and some, it was a little lyrical. I'm just gonna drop that in there, but the I don't want to use the word incorrect, but but sometimes you learn some strange patterning from those techniques growing up,
Yeah,
and can really wreak havoc on the body. Like there'll be imbalances, or there'll be things that just don't function. And so I
yeah,
think both of us, as we've continued, both as teachers, I think our teaching informs our making a lot as well. And so in thinking about how we teach and how we share information, we're trying to understand efficiency and um, how the body is organized, and trying to find what is proper alignment and those kind of
yeah. Yeah, I feel that um there's a shift happening, I think maybe, and it sounds like you're hitting like touching that a little bit, like that there's like a previous maybe conception that like there's like a correct form that you need to inhabit, and then there's like kind of whatever you need to do to get there, which includes like breaking your body a little bit, which is really like a maybe to like harken back to last week's conversation. We were talking a lot about the like commodity of the body, and like sort of what it means to consider a person or a dancer as a person, you know. And then I think that there's this big push to like finding tools and finding understanding and increasing like a dancer's comprehension as an artist and as an um, anatomicist. Maybe there's probably a better word for that, but yeah, it feels like it's the same world a little bit. What's something you feel? What bothered you the most, maybe either of you, when you were looking at this stuff? Because I know it always bothered me that I like never felt like I had a ballet body. I never felt like, well, it was a big struggle anyway. But yeah, go for it. Like whatever.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we could go on a few different tangents here, and so rein me if I get too much there. But,
Mhm.
obviously, most of our dance trainings, if you went to a university or a college or even younger dance training, is like
Mhm.
in, Western civilization, and even to go as far to say like white supremacy, that it's this very much like European centric sort of like ballet bodies are the ideal bodies, and those bodies are white, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's one thing that has always not felt correct, or not a broad way of thinking. It's very narrow-minded.
yeah.
Again, maybe I'll say, and then you want to say, but having spent all of my training pretty much came from a ballet background, and then I went to high school at the North Carolina School of the Arts for
Hmm.
ballet, and was kicked out of that because I didn't have the ideal body, and then
Oh,
going to
wow.
just these sort of ideas of like conservatory training and how great it can be, but also how detrimental it can be. That there's not a lot of somatic practices that teach you about your body, this thing that you're training every single day. And also this thing, like thinking of it as that sort of like objectivity. And although I think there is a place to consider the body as an object, that's, without denying its humanity and the person inside of it. And so I think the things that have always bothered us is like this lack of understanding in sort of training our instruments, that there is a lot of incorrect information out there and a lot of assumptions that are also sort of steeped in white supremacist ballet European centric bodies. And so, how can we, like, we've been saying in our classes recently, this sort of return to the body, this like really deep sort of investigation and practice of like returning to yourself and the body that you have, understanding its systems, understanding its functionality, and then also how you move within your body in the world, how your body relates to other bodies, how your humanity relates to all of that. So,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. It feels like a big push towards like embracing like a diverse way of being. Like it's not an ideal; it's a broad experience. Um,
yeah, and there's something about it, like like sort of stripping the body back to its systems and understanding, your nervous system and your lymphatic system and the way that the bones align and the way that your muscles wrap around them and what muscles are you actually using and what do you need for this and how much momentum and force and all of those things sort of um, help or fight against. That there's something about that feels really universal in training rather than the sort of like, oh, this is the way that your body should look in this, or this is the sort of classical technique of this.
Or
Like,
this
what
is
if,
the form that you have to mold your body into fitting. Like I
yeah,
think a lot of what we look at in our teaching and what we're excited about is like making space for people to be themselves, and let that be the underlying thrust.
that like the way that I, do this movement or the way that I do a plank or a plie is different from the way that you do a plie because our bodies are different, our anatomy is different. So why don't we just talk about the functionality of it and what's actually happening in the body rather than trying to force it to look like something?
It sounds scary in a way, like especially if you come from a world like that world. If you come from that world and then you take a step in there, I know that there's a weird safety in like knowing that there's one ideal, that there's like one thing that's like, oh, this is what it should be. And like, even though I have all the insecurities in the world or like all of the hangups or demons or whatever you want to call them about like achieving that, like in a weird like like I can think about it in like a psychological way of like, oh, at least I know what the demon is. And like when you're like, oh, the demon doesn't exist, there's just you're like,
Doesn't exist.
but yeah, my concern is like when there's one ideal that's so limiting, and then there's so many people that are like, I have no chance of even getting close to that, and so then that shuts out a lot of people. And so how do we embrace the multifacetedness of the human body?
mhm,
It's also like I feel like so much of my training was great and I really appreciate it.
yeah,
So much of what I feel like I'm doing now is sort of unlearning that training in a way or like reimagining it. Like
mhm,
what I was given and these sort of things that were passed down and the way that I train my body and sort of saying like I have that, but also what are the things that can sort of I can unlearn or relearn and reimagine and like repurpose.
yeah,
So yes, it is scary, but it's change and we got to change, right? Like change is sort of inevitable, adaptability,
especially now.
Yeah.
especially now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, what are you feeling now? Like now?
Right, like there's these conversations that are happening of like how I was thinking, and then like COVID happened, and like now how I'm thinking in this
Yeah.
now moment. Oh, we're both like there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I can't wait to get back to normal, and we don't feel like we're not going back to normal. We're going back to something different. Um,
Yeah.
and and I am hoping that in this time we can craft a better way of moving forward.
Mhm.
In some ways, like we all have this time to sit and think and hopefully process and imagine and be creative, hopefully,
Not
or
also
not be
valid.
creative, which is we'll talk about that in a second. But finding, yeah, how do we move forward in a better way? I hope that we come out of this stronger and more resilient and more equitable and more supportive and a stronger community, not a more fractured community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about, we had a big conversation last week about the fractured quality of the community, even though we share goals in some ways, some very important ways. Um, yeah, I wonder what lessons that are coming out of this, because for me, I think one of the big lessons is that what we were doing before only worked because we didn't stop to think about it very much, and there was never you never like had a chance to like shake the system up. And the minute that the system got shaken up, like literally everything got like the foundation crumbled. The
Yeah.
system is collapsing. Sorry, I just watched Betroffenheit last night on Marquee Theater. Holy, oh, what a piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, okay, so if we like look back in history of the Judson Church movement, and it was happening during this time of like civil unrest, and there was sort of this push against the sort of capitalist systems, and it was about like equality and community and this sort of return to the body, and also adding in like abstraction and push against form and those sorts of things. I feel like we're in a very similar time, right? It's like there's civil unrest, there's awful, terrible things happening in the world. Our government is a fucking joke. Sorry, can I curse on here? Can I say
Yeah.
that?
Oh, please curse more.
Uh,
Fucking disappointed. How can you curse? That's bullshit. Please stop. God damn it.
so like I'm in the South. I'm like, do I get to drop as many F bombs as I do? This is really hard.
Yeah.
Man, y'all. But anyways, there's like it's a similar time, and I feel like it's our job as artists, and it's always been our job as artists to sort of push against those societal structures, and we can't do that unless there's a real understanding of community. And what does that mean, right? Like, what is community? Um, I have always felt this fracture that you talk about, and I think it's due to the fact that there's a lack of resources and there's a lot of narcissism in performance art, especially in that of dance, and that's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just a thing that's there. And so,
Sorry to just to like jab in there. When you say narcissism, you mean like what do you mean by that? Like, can you describe that a little bit?
sure, I think to be a performing artist, there has to be a sense of like I want to be seen and I want people to see me, and I'm sharing this because there is that, and there's also that in the sort of like curating of performance art, that there is this like, well, I found this wonderful artist and look what I can do and what I think that they're giving, right? So
I
there
also
is,
think of like the ego
yes.
of, especially, I mean, definitely in the ballet world, but also modern, and like the like Paul Taylor Dance Company, the Martha Graham Dance Company, like these like gigantic institutions that have been centered around a singular choreographer, and the and ego in that, and like even now, like Martha has been dead for how many decades now, and like
And that's
that
not to say
company.
that like the work wasn't valid, or that like I think people hear narcissism and ego and automatically think it's a negative thing, and I'm not putting that judgment on there, but it is there, right? Like you have to, yeah, you're giving yourself, your body, your whole humanity. It's not like you're picking up or this is your tool, and you have to have some understanding and narcissism in that in order to produce this and to share that. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that?
The original question was about uh, lessons to
Lessons.
learn.
Something. Yeah.
I think this is a time of change, and I think as scary as this change is, and as much as we sort of grapple with the validity of what we do as artists, like also having lost work in like the first week, I mean, it's like cut the art funding, this is not necessary, and struggling with those ideas that the lessons for me are about like how do we change the system because we have the tools to do so, like how does art, and as artists, do we have the ability to sort of lead these changes, that art can be really radical, that it is for the people, it's not for the hierarchy, that it can be something that's uniting, that it is necessary. And community, I think community is so important, and sort of fixing those fractures in the community, creating space for each other, allowing for space to be there. Um, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, yes, all of those things. Yes. We've also been talking a lot in our class, questioning what is practice. And that word has been really, um, it really has been resounding for us, like on a daily sense. And um, sorry, I'm now trying to, we've said this a couple times, and now I'm trying to clearly articulate these thoughts around practice, but in a time where, um, or maybe say prior, like our practice had been like showing up to a studio, taking class, being in rehearsal, creating in a studio. Like those things were kind of defining the way we practiced being a dancer, being a choreographer.
Hmm.
Uh, and and now that has radically shifted. Like we can't show up and be around people in
Yeah.
those. And so looking at like what we do in our daily lives that does contribute to who we are and thinking about practice in a more holistic way, um, of like, this book I read today is kind of informing me as a human, as an artist, as a creator. This meal I cooked is feeding me, and that is the intention behind that. Prepping of a meal has a bit of creativity in it, and that's informing me and feeding me in a way. And so trying to really look globally at what we as individuals are doing and honoring that that is all part of our practice, and that makes us stronger artists, and that makes us resilient and helps us survive in this time. And um, yeah, there's no doubt that that idea of practice has really been pivotal for us in
So
survival.
so something like practice exists continuously rather than like in a segmented
Yes.
system in which dance is sort of separate from the rest of life. Um, yeah, I think that's a very interesting point to think up because I think it sort of begs the question of where does dance belong and where does it exist? And if it's a bit more, um, if we think honestly about where it exists and what like perhaps your ideals might be as any given dancer performing at the Joyce, performing at City Center, performing at Du Hague, performing in like any of these places, BAM, like they're all stages in a space that require a lot of money, that there's a price point that you have to get through in order to like witness it. Um, and very interestingly, the first thing that most companies started doing was just sharing their work freely on like Instagram,
Yep.
which is really beautiful. But it also makes me wonder, like they're sharing works that existed on stages, you know. And if we're looking at like what needs to change and like, and we don't necessarily need to have the answers, of course, um, but we could have the answers because we're the experts. Like where would it then go? Like what platform, what way do we take dance and share it? Like,
And I love that the internet helps democratize a lot of things. And it was fascinating to watch, like in the matter of a week,
yeah,
it was like free or donation based online. And a lot of that was, watching people struggle with loss of income and how do you survive. And some of it is holding on to an identity that was really cemented in a time, and now everything that was built upon has crumbled underneath it. Um, but yeah, like to go back to one of your the beginning of this questioning was like, where does dance fit in, or what is its role? And I, yes, I feel like I am daily questioning that, and I haven't found that
yeah,
truth from it. Like sometimes it feels really good to like we have this room that we're in that we call our studio. We were able to clear it out and come in here and dance or to teach class. That feels grounding and familiar. Um, but I think daily we're kind of questioning the value. And I think for us, what we found is the knowledge that we have of our bodies, like the experiences of trusting our bodies and listening to the intelligence that our bodies have, trusting, like sometimes it's our gut feeling or trusting what our body is telling us. I think a lot of times in our society we're very intellectual, and so it's a mental intelligence prioritized over body intelligence. And I feel like us as movement practitioners, as embodied people, we have this ongoing dialogue with our bodies, and that is something of value that we can share with the entire human race. It's like, this is really important, to be connected to this body that we all have.
And not, not in a like fitness, do your exercises, do your sports sort of thing. But you think about if you've sort of thought about, or I mean, you can feel this or done any research into sort of like body trauma and the way that the body holds trauma from, childhood and even birth and things like that, and traumatic events, that it's not physicalized like in the brain. It's not like your brain holds on to those memories. Like memories are very fleeting.
Yeah.
It's really within the body. So you see people who have had a lot of trauma in life, and sort of the way that they stand, or the way that they
Respond to
touch, or the way that they interact around people. It's the body sort of holding on to those things. So I think it's important to, like, in a way, like, reteach people how to get in touch with their body, and not in a, like, again, fitness or sports. It's not about the way that it looks, but about how it feels, and how when you are in embodied practices, and again, this idea of practice is like, mowing the lawn is a practice, or, picking up your suitcase or your book bag is a practice. Like, you're embodied in those ways, right? Like, embodied is in the body. Sort of retooling that to fit in this world, and get people in touch with their bodies again. Can I read something really quick that I
Yeah,
think
of course. Yeah.
is interesting about this idea of art, and sort of where it exists inside of this?
Capitalist structure.
Yeah, it's called. You can look it up, and maybe I'll share it. If I get a photo of it, I have it on my phone. It was at Earth Dance when we went, and
Nice.
um, found it fascinating. But it's called the Why Cheap Art Manifesto. People have been thinking too long that art is a privilege of the museums and the rich. Art is not business. It does not belong to banks and fancy investors. Art is food. You can eat it, but it feeds you. Or you can't eat it, but it feeds you. Art has to be cheap and available to everybody. It needs to be everywhere because it is the inside of the world. Art soothes pain. Art wakes up sleepers. Art fights against war and stupidity. Art sings hallelujah. Art is for kitchens. Art is like good bread. Art is like green trees. Art is like white clouds in the blue sky. Art is cheap. Hurrah. And it's from the Bread and Puppet Glover, Vermont, 1984. I'll try and find it and then can share it.
Yeah. Or you can also just type into the chat on the side the title, and then allow our attendees to go search.
Perfect.
Also, attendees, just a heads up, I think some of you are watching anonymously and some of you are here publicly, but if you have questions, there's a little Q&A button that you can use to posit questions to the group, to the panelists, and we'll see them and then we'll answer them if you'd like. And you're also, there's also a chat function on the side where you are more than welcome to start up side conversations and talk about whatever we're talking about as well. Great, thank you so much. Yeah, yes, these are all really critical questions. Technology is going to be a huge part of how this happens, I think. I think already, like, Zoom became a multi-billion-dollar company the minute this all happened.
Literally overnight.
If it is like doing well in this time, it is Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom, and then the hand sanitizer company,
Yeah.
and toilet paper CEOs are just.
Inject Lysol.
Everyone, do not inject Lysol into yourself. It does not cure COVID. Please don't do
Apparently
that.
that needs to be repeated because some people don't know.
Don't do it now.
Sorry.
Oh my gosh. There was, I think we all, quick divergence, and then we'll talk about things related to art, but I think we all have that person on Facebook who's like, well, Trump was just like thinking, at least he's trying to come up with creative solutions. And it's so, I think it's very clear indication of how so fully you can be wrapped up in somebody and needing them to be right because they sort of represent who you are and like what you believe, and just being willing to sort of like, I don't know, it feels like gaslighting, or like or when somebody's dating somebody who's abusive and they're like, well, you just don't understand, like when they like hit me or when they call me stupid names, like it's really just them like showing how much they love me, kind of stuff. It's really gross.
Yeah.
uh, and I can't believe that.
In this time, like, that all the evidence is there. Like, how do you not see this that we're all seeing?
We've been
Yeah.
having this little bit of practice when we go, grocery shopping or anytime we're in our car. Um, since we are in North Carolina, which is, part of the Bible Belt and part of the conservative South, and the area that we're in particular, is a very conservative town. But we've been listening to conservative radio stations, in
Mm.
particular Rush Limbaugh. Um, we,
It's
I mean,
a
it's a lot of screaming at the radio that comes from both of us. But it is a practice to sort of at least hear and not understand, but at least hear the sort of rhetoric that is being told on the quote unquote other side, sort of assuming that we're all um, relatively liberal or whatever your affiliations are, but just sort of trying to follow and listen so that rather than having these conversations um, with family members or with people that you come in contact with where it's just like, no, you don't know what you're talking about, like at least trying to hear where they're coming from and then maybe trying to find a way into discussing how this actually doesn't line up.
Yeah, that I will admit, I am, because I started there actually when I was much younger. I started on the very like very Christian, very religious, very conservative side of things, like, and I see how I could have stayed there if like just a few choice things in my life hadn't been different. Like I think uh, in a lot of ways, I think that the big difference between where you end up on the political spectrum sort of depends on where you grew up, and
Totally.
like not so much on who you are. Like I think given if we could like wipe the slate clean a little bit, I think we would all find out that we're much more on the same page about much more than we think we are right now, just due to like divergence in circumstance. Um, yeah. That said, I think that actually ties into a question that I had for you all, uh, which we can go here, we can't, but what I'm curious if you know anyone or if you can think about this conversation, or maybe we can just chat about it. But I feel like there's a big conversation about the like the commodic value of art, and then the career validity of such a field right now. So I think that's something that's really biting on a lot of people's heels right now, mine included. Like the art, like we were the first to like sort of get the shaft, and then I think we'll be the last to sort of crawl back. If like given that like some things will come back to normal, quote unquote. If we came back to exactly how we were before, we would be sort of the last industry to do so. Um, and it's got a lot of people, I think, sort of worried about, is this a viable career path for me? Am I going to be able to have a retirement? Am I going to like, what if I got sick during this pandemic? Like, what
Yeah.
would happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh,
Um,
yeah, like you know,
uh,
I,
Yeah, no good answers, I'm sure, but like,
it throws up so many different thoughts. The one that I want to grab onto first is that, like, the hustle that artists have had to do to exist in a capitalist society,
mhm,
in many ways, has prepared us to be survivors. I think of all the other sources of income and the adaptability that we've had to have just to exist. um, like all of the jobs that are maybe not in the arts sector that allow us to then make a work of art or just to take class or whatever that is. I think those negotiations that we've had to do prior, uh,
Mhm.
in some ways, make us very resilient. Um, I don't quite know how that looks moving forward, and I worry that it may be even more of that and even harder to earn the capital to to make work, because especially dance is very expensive, and the way it has been, like you have to pay for a studio, which is expensive, and then you have to pay for the people that you're making dances on, or at least have some type of relationship or some dialogue with those humans that you're asking to dedicate time to be in that space with you. And so, how do you compensate them for that time? And
Yeah.
maybe other ways. But so, just knowing that dance, especially in relation to other art, has maybe that's a hard statement to make, but not compared to other arts, but just say dance itself has a lot of overhead. Um,
Yeah.
and, and and how do we, because I think moving forward it's still going to be there. There's not going to automatically be like free space. So there's the I Dream of Genie, free space.
Free space.
As much as we'd love it to be that way.
Well,
um,
and also, if one thing is free, it's like, well, then how do you compensate the other thing? Like, if we're giving everyone free space, how does the organization itself giving the free space makes money? There's always like a give and take.
Yeah.
I feel very conflicted about this because as much as like I'm idealistic, I'm realistic, and idealistic saying that like it's all going to change and we're going to help it change and we're all going to be great, but at the end of the day, it's like it's not just us. Like these are like systematic structures that need to change. This is like federal money that needs to be directed towards the arts and not just supporting the sort of like highest tiers of those arts, but also supporting like the smaller organizations and also offering relief and also sort of bringing in artists in more public settings. You love to talk about the New Deal.
oh, the Green New Deal.
No, no, no.
Oh, the original
The
New
original New
Deal
Deal.
PR 1940s. Yeah.
was like hiring artists to make sculptures for government buildings, and some of those programs that were like the government is like, we're going to pay artists to make our country better. And oftentimes I miss that, like, America understanding the value of artists and like the contribution that art can have to the fabric of our nation. And I go back to what Natty just read, and like art feeds us, and I feel like America doesn't be like, we need to have art. They're like,
Well,
oh, it's nice to have art, and like I have money, so I'll pay for art, and art just seems to be this shiny luxury a lot of times. But like art education is really important for all of our students, and like there's
and these are things that like yes we can push for and we can um, get together and we can have community and we can push for these things, but at the end of the day it's not like we're not going to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not just going to come from us. It has to come from a higher up. It has to come from the federal government to say these things to happen. So it's like
or at least needs to come from like a groundswell of people. Like there needs to be widespread a wake up that we're like, oh yes, I remember that we need art, and
Yeah.
that's really hard.
I have a weird outlook on that, which maybe is wrong, but I kind of feel like the United States is really full of art. There's just so much, like, and
oh yeah.
everything we do is like sort of informed by artistic sentiment or like practice or aesthetics or um, rhythm and timing. Like, if you look at the way we approached art, like maybe 100 years ago, 80 years ago, there's like a clear difference between how important art is for like the character and the identity of the country, and for like some sort of zeitgeist of what we are, which was like I don't know too much more about it. I'm like really tempted to make very specific statements that I'm not going to make, but there was this really juicy push for like American exemplary artists. I come from the swing dance and Lindy Hop world, and there's a group of swing dancers, Lindy Hoppers, all African American from New York, who were world famous, and they traveled the world on America's dime, on the like federal government's dime, to go and like show the rest of the world like this is what we created, this is our national art. And contemporary dance and modern dance are like part of that. Like there's some European stuff as well, but there's like some stuff that's homegrown, and there's a part of me that wonders if we're just so awash with art that we've like forgotten that it's the air we breathe, you know.
Mm.
um
Yeah, and yeah, I think that can totally be a part of this. It's like we we take what we have for granted, right? And so if we take all of those things away that we're taking for granted, like, do we start to miss it? You know, if art isn't available, if we can't go to live performances, if you can't listen to Spotify, if you know, if you can't watch TV, like even if it's shitty reality TV, which I love, so no judgment on that. But like,
Just
yeah.
like even if it's that, it's like the sort of lowest form of the like highly intellectual
Sorry, am I losing?
art. We're gonna miss it. So can you hear us?
uh-oh.
Uh oh,
Yeah.
do you hear us?
Am I frozen or are you guys frozen?
We could be frozen.
Let
Cool. It's okay. Um,
mm,
Don't worry about it. North Carolina, the internet, it struggles sometimes, but I
okay.
think we're good-ish.
Okay. I can hear you at least. You're a little choppy visually, but the struggles, y'all. The struggles.
we
Struggles,
struggles.
y'all.
Yeah.
We're gonna
Uh,
try and push through. If we need to switch to a different network, we may lose you for a second, and then we'll
okay.
come back. We
We'll be back.
promise.
Okay. Well, if you
Um,
disappear, then
but
we'll know why. Um, so for everyone else, while you guys do that, there's a Q&A question that I saw that I want to put out there. It's
we'll
from,
be back.
it's from an anonymous source, anonymous Tintindy. How do we assert and value dance and performance art in holistic and deeply outreach pathways if the financial structures do not exist to support livelihoods? Very important question. How do you all envision financial structures aligning with artists who specifically work in intentional ephemerality and deeply researched, but not necessarily seen, felt, heard, experienced? I think this ties in a lot to what we were talking about with capitalism, with art existing uh, within this structure, and then perhaps a talk back to um, what um, what the government's role is, what society's role is in supporting the arts, or or maybe even it's a marketing question of like reminding people of how important it is. Yeah, thoughts on that? And you can look at the also at the
Yeah.
Q&A question yourself if you would like to.
This makes me think of, and I can't remember who said it or what the town. I think there was some Dance NYC town hall, and there was a point made that oftentimes, especially in New York City, the city itself takes for granted the art and the artists that live there. And I think New York City often capitalizes on the fact that artists from around the country and around the world flock to the city because it has become a hub, and the city doesn't do a lot to then support the artists once they're there. Um, and then other thought that maybe isn't related, but New York City is so expensive. Um, and I think back to like the romantic Judson era, or like the 60s and 70s, and what New York City looked like. And people were able to have a gigantic loft in Soho for dirt cheap that they could then use as their rehearsal space. And that is, oh my, that is like such a romantic idea of New York that is just not a reality anymore. And so then I'm questioning, and I mean, we have such a love-hate relationship with New York City. And we're like, why are we all continuing to flock there? And all of the other things that we have to do just so that we can carve out a little bit of creative space where maybe there's another place where we can get cheap space and our time doesn't have to be so devoted to the places that we make money. And can, so like there may, in this time, it may be people are leaving New York and maybe they never come back, and that they're, going back to communities like, I don't think we're going to end up here in rural North Carolina forever, but like, there is something to like, we could get a lot cheaper space here, and then what does that impact? Like, what is then the
Or what's the accessibility too for, I think about, I, there's something basically how world, and if you're in the arts or in anything, are we, can you hear
um,
us?
Uh,
ah
Nattie and
Hold
Hollis
on, y'all.
cutting out a little bit for me. Can you, if you're willing to speak in the chat, can you just let me know if Nattie and Hollis are sort of a little cutting in and out for you too?
We're here.
are we
We're here.
back?
I can hear you. Okay. Yeah. I think it might be your Wi-Fi situation.
Go check and see if anyone else is on the Wi-Fi.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll type here in the chat better. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Maybe I'll keep talking and we can sort of hear. Yeah, thanks, Dave.
yeah.
Yeah, it literally like if anyone else gets on it, it's hard. And this is so it's so frustrating about these online platforms.
I'm not sure.
Um, but maybe we'll try and push through, and then just like if y'all can just type if you don't hear us, and just be like, stop it, and then we'll figure out something. But so sort of going out in the world, and returning to your hometown and sort of bringing all of the knowledge that you've had in the world in the arts and sort of reinvesting in the communities that you grew up in, is something that is really important, especially if you come from a very sort of conservative or maybe like single-minded community that doesn't have the access to the resources that you've been able to go out into the world and the experiences that you've had. A lot of times I feel like people don't understand things that they don't know. So if you've never been able to see a live performance, if you've never been able to see modern or postmodern or, dance in whatever form, then you don't understand it. But a lot of times the moment that people see it, they're like, oh, I felt something, or oh, that was so beautiful, or oh, I didn't understand it, but it made me think. And so, we're not saying like everyone move out of New York, but I do feel like maybe this is a time to sort of question about, like, is New York serving you? Like, is it giving you the things that you need and you want to survive? And maybe it is a time to return, and that doesn't mean that you can't ever go back. Like, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, if I leave New York, I'm never going to be able to dance for such and such, or I'm never going to be able to show work, or I'm never going to be able to get those opportunities. And it's like, you can still apply for all of those opportunities outside of New York. And probably like you'll get a lot more funding if you're applying for grants because the pool is smaller and you have all of this research that you've done and all of this thought you've put into this. So, if you're living here, then you're probably going to get those resources. You'll find more communities to sort of expand into because probably where you're going already has some sort of dance or embodied practice community that you can sort of tap into and share information. So it's a question that we ask all the time of like, is New York serving us in the way that we want it to? And it changes from every day. But I think if you're like asking yourself that question every day and the answer is no every day, maybe it's time to think about
Yeah.
like where you can be, right?
Yeah. That just makes me think about what some of our strategy for survival in the past couple of years has been. My family lives in Massachusetts, and we have a lot of ties to the New England community, and um, have been teaching and making work. And I feel like our creative lives have also kind of blossomed in New England in addition to New York, partly because we feel like we don't get a lot of support in New York and aren't able to um, do all of the things that we want to do. And so finding other locations that we're able to be part of the community, help contribute to the performing community in that area, and feeling the mutual support that like we can offer and get thing
And I think that I like mutual support and how we can also support that community, because it's not a situation and like don't do this this like don't ever do this. Like, you don't want to go into a community and be like, I'm taking over, it's mine now, give me all the resources. Like, that's so shitty. And people that do that, no, absolutely not. Stop it right now. But it is this idea of like, well, how can I support what's already here, the systems that are already here, and how can they support me? And also, like, it has to be a give and take. It can't just be a take and take and take and take and steal and take and take. And so, we've spent years sort of
I would say like
cultivating.
a decade of like watching, like going to participate and going to see things and dialoguing with people, and then watching how that community has really grown over that decade that we have been engaging with them, and then finding the ways that we can contribute, and oftentimes we're able to do different things in that community than we are in New York. Um,
Yeah, a little spotty. Sorry. That's okay. One more time.
We're here. We're here.
Okay, good, great.
Dan.
It
Sorry, y'all. It's
it showed right back up when you cursed, so I think just curse more. You're okay.
so we need to curse more.
Yeah. The last part of that question I think is really interesting. I think how do you all envision financial structures aligning with artists who specifically work in intentful ephemerality and deeply researched experience? I wonder if dance, I think maybe to harken back to something we talked about earlier, is maybe opening up um, we've been talking a lot about limited views and about practice and expanding what a dance practice could be. We could also, I think perhaps there's a part of this that ties into not the fitness aspect, but maybe just the wellness. Perhaps like there's an umbrella term for wellness, quote unquote, that these practices belong in something where it's not a like traditional performance setting, that has a viable market, that has a viable financial outcome that's associated with it.
I think there's a lot already of sort of these, for lack of a better term, healing arts. Like in the healing arts,
Mhm.
that there is a lot of artistic embodied practices within that. I'm thinking in particular like Rolfing, and body mind centering, Bonnie Bain Cohen, who, if you don't know, please go research. She does some really beautiful Bonnie Bain Bridge Cohen, sorry. Um, Body mind centering, this idea of like, mind and body connecting as one, and sort of these ideas of like healing arts, which
Mhm.
I think a lot about in terms of like, not the aesthetics and the form of art, but the sort of like internal um, feelings and systems within that. in art, that there's already been a lot of work that's been done about sort of connecting the like neurological with the physical, and the sort of like, again, these ideas of like the way that the body holds trauma, and sort of using embodied practices to work through and in and around that. And so maybe there is a connection of these performances, or like performance art, with this sort of healing. Um, uh, um, Lion's jaw. I'm gonna type it here. Oops, that wasn't it. Lion's jaw.
Well, you have to connect that for people. How'd you get to lion's jaw?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So Lion's Jaw is a performance and a workshop festival that happens in Massachusetts.
Okay.
In the fall. They've done it for 3 years, and they bring in some really incredible people. But one of the founders of it, Jared, what's Jared's last name?
No, Williams.
Williams, I believe, does this practice called group shake, which essentially is just a sort of structured shake. And if you've ever done any sort of like long form shaking, it's intense, and it really sort of dredges up these emotions, because this sort of like physical rattling of the body starts to like percolate and dredge up the things that we hold on to. It's like a real letting go of all of the stuff around you and within you. And so check it out. Lion's Jaw also has a lot of really wonderful master classes that they're sort of curating right now in this virtual space. But the reason I thought of that was this idea of like a physical practice of shaking that sort of allows for the healing aspect of it, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm thinking in this moment a lot about your question about the commodification of dance, and lots of thoughts. That like acknowledging that we live in a capitalist society, and we're not going to change that right now. My hope is that we can, but that's another discussion. But no, there isn't going to be a universal income for every person in this country in the near future. So then, how do artists exist within that capitalist structure? And so a lot of it is having some type of commodity, something that you can sell, something that you can offer in exchange for money. Dance is hard because we don't have artwork that you can hang on the wall. It is ephemeral, it's about the moment. And so oftentimes it is ticket sales and classes and some of this like experience, and how do you get people to pay money for that? And if governments or communities aren't, if there isn't a lot of grant money that can kind of support and kind of cover some of those overhead costs, then a lot of that falls on the individual artist and or the participants to pay for that. I don't know if I have any solutions for that, but I just felt like acknowledging all of those structures felt important, and acknowledging what goes into a performance. And that's maybe not where I want to go, but but yeah.
Stephanie Walken shared something today on Instagram. If you follow them, they had a show that was supposed to go up at the Chocolate Factory, and was obviously canceled because of COVID. But shared something about that we can't just sort of throw up our shows on Instagram or and be like it's the same experience, right? That like you can't just be like, hey, here's my video of us dancing in the space, have a sort of same experience with it. So if we are continuing in this virtual way, and if your sort of idea of how to create or how to receive income is to share your work, that it is about sort of reimagining the ways in which it's shared, and then also that to not devalue this idea of experience, that like you don't have to be like, and then you get a virtual and then you get a this outfit, and then we're gonna send a t-shirt, and then you're gonna get a cup of coffee, and then we're gonna like have a 60-hour artist talk with you. That if you can really deeply think about how the experience that you're sharing, that people will enjoy the experience itself, that that is something of value, and something that we can't
She's just thinking real hard, yo.
say, or 100 other things.
Still spotty? Is it spotty for everyone else too?
I'm really sorry, y'all. I'm really sorry.
No worries.
No.
Yeah, it's better. Like there's like a wave of it where it doesn't work, and then it sort of opens up again, and then it clamps up again. So yeah, I would love to keep talking, but we're actually we're a little bit within striking distance of the end, and I don't want us to end on a like bad note. So I think that's very. I have a couple of questions over here, but I actually don't want to ask them because I want to dive in a little bit, just one last little bit to this idea that we were just talking about it being an experience. And because I think this question, I think is it's such a great question that whoever this anonymous person asked, because A, it's really hard to answer, and B, it's something that we do have to tackle. I would love to think about. So I had this idea, like maybe I don't know, a while ago, about dance, something between Sleep No More, where you sort of wander about and you sort of see dance happening, and it sort of happens to you, and versus like a way that you can have an experience that actually heightens you versus using dance. Because I think we tend to think of dance when it's not a performance to be a system for healing. And I think we're really sort of upset somewhere deep down in our souls because we're so obsessed with healing and wellness and recovery as a country right now, which, there are tons of valid reasons for. But we're a little less focused on sort of elevating ourselves and learning new things and getting new experiences and being changed and being transformed. And like, I think for me at least, and I think for a lot of people I know, a big reason we're part of dance is that we saw something and it transformed us and made me feel like a more open person, like more connected with the world. So maybe that's actually the research, maybe that's the research of how we can take what we have now and bring it to the world, not just to be like, I can help you get better, but this is something that can help you become a better person, or at least maybe not with that amount of hubris, but like perhaps this can help you to expand in the way that it's helped me and expand.
Yeah, we were starting to notice a trend both in our own making and in some other artists that we are big fans of. This idea of the audience performer relationship, and sometimes the audience mode is very passive, and how there can be a little more of an active sense of witnessing, not necessarily like audience participation per se, but something that's along that spectrum. Like we just before COVID saw Kimberly Bartosik's show at Nyla, and
You have to say live
oh
arts
sorry,
now.
Live Arts,
I don't think you can
old
say
habits.
that.
I know
You
that
gotta
bad.
say live arts.
Anymore?
But
I don't think so.
I think they're trying really hard to be live
NYLA
arts.
is the New York
Public Library.
That's NYPL. It's the New York Library something,
Oh,
but the acronym, they're trying to be live arts. So
Kimberly Bartosik's show at Live Arts, and now I'm trying to remember exactly how she phrased it, but it was so. It felt like she was taking each audience member along an individual journey, and the like pulling the audience into the performance as opposed to that separation that often a proscenium creates of performer and audience. And And in the work that we were working on prior to everything shutting down, we were also trying to find like how can the audience have some type of physical experience or feel like they're participating or contributing to a shared experience that we're having together. I think we're really excited about that. And I think several other people are as well. Experience really important. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe,
Because
yeah, go ahead.
and just the other thought that then just popped in my head was like maybe this goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning of this talk about the body knowledge that dancers and choreographers and embodied people have, and finding some way that the audience can feel embodied, can have a physical experience that is related to what they're witnessing. And
Yeah,
it's not
I
just
mean,
in
we've
their
all been
eyes.
there in a performance, and suddenly you're like swaying or you're like leaning in further as you're watching it, and that in itself is like you empathizing with what is happening in front of you, and you like wanting to experience that in a way. And yeah, I'm I'm curious about that relationship and how that can also translate in this virtual way, if it does. I
Yeah.
don't know. Questions. I mean, I don't think any of us have the answers right now. I would love someone to tell me the answers to all of that, but I think it's what we're questioning in this time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. And I think we also have to remind ourselves that eventually we will be out in the world touching, holding hands, hugging. I miss hugging so much. Oh my gosh. Aw.
Face. Not the face.
Wash.
Um, wash your hands. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so we're getting on in time there. Some great conversation. I want to ask just a couple of these, excuse me, a couple of these prompt questions that I had. Um, let's do a fun one, since we haven't. What's a work that you've watched? Say what?
Rapid fire round.
Lightning round.
Um, what's a work that changed your life or changed you as an artist? Either that you were in or that you saw or in dance, outside of dance.
Um, oh my god.
Oh my
I'm
god.
trying to like cycle through every single
I know.
day.
It's a big cycle.
I think it's like first answer is the answer, right?
Okay.
First answer is the answer. Can I have two?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think one of the first ones is "Home" by Doug Verone, which
Mm.
is a duet. Um, it was one of the first works where I walked out and was like, just I had an ugly cry for 20 minutes, and it was one of the first things that made me really feel something about dance other than the structure. Then on the other side of that is um, face or phasings.
Oh, Anna Teresa de Kira's Mockers.
Yeah.
Oh,
Phasing.
yeah.
Okay.
It's a big question.
So the like iconic things that come to mind are Pina Bausch's Full Moon. I don't know, my German's really bad, but it means full moon. And it was at BAM, and there's a gigantic rock on stage, and there's a river, and it's like, oh, it's just like such embodied joy and dancing in water. And I would love to be in that piece. It just seems like people are like sliding and splashing, and it's like, and Pina Bausch, so there's like dresses and long hair and all the
Right.
other trappings. Gorgeous piece. And then we recently saw Anna Teresa de Kiersmacher's A Love Supreme also at Live Arts. And, you know, just like love Kiersmacher so much, pared down and simple. Essentially, each dancer is an embodiment of an instrument, and so they're kind of musicalizing in relationship to the score. Um, Beautiful. That Coltrane score is incredible, and the work is transcendent. And then to also throw up a Doug Vernon piece, Boats Leaving is a piece from Doug from early 2000, I think 2006. Both as an audience member, gets me every time. It's this beautiful journey that a community goes on together, and there is this kind of haunting sense of loss.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, I've danced for the last decade, and that work being inside of it. Sorry, piece holds a special place in my
Since you did three together. Yes. Do you hear us?
Yep.
heart. Okay, good.
Okay, good.
We're back.
Cool. All right. Last question.
But the,
We'll go for it. Yeah. Wait.
just to add one more.
Sure.
2018, I believe. Maybe. Yeah, 2017.
Yes.
Which she premiered at Abram Art Center, our website actually, but sort of as a queer woman who was having a male son, dealing with masculinity and sort of her relationship to men in the world, and it's absolutely stunning.
Who was it? I think you.
And now all the other pieces I want to say.
Who was the person? Would you mind typing their name?
Vanessa Anspa. I'm going to type it. Anspaughh. Vanessa Anspa.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and then you wanted to say something, Hollis? You said?
Oh, just that now all of the other pieces that I want to say, but we're going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last question, just like kind of a fun one. What's your favorite thing about living and loving and working with your romantic partner as your professional partner? Or they froze? They freeze?
In a lovely way, there's not a separation of the work that we make and the work that we put into our relationship and the years that we've spent together. And yeah, this one's a really beautiful and talented performer, and it's really a joy to be able to share space with him. I've always said I hate dancing alone. I hate when I'm soloing in any way. It's like I want somebody there with me, and so to have my life partner there on the stage with me or in the creative process with me is really special.
I'd say at the beginning I was really nervous because like I don't know, like with any collaboration, dialogue is really important, and it's been really beautiful the way that we have navigated creating and performing and teaching and all of our things together. That was so much more articulate than the way it came out. But that there is this dialogue, this the way that we like support each other, the way that we push each other, the way that we grow. And so even like going back to watching some of those first dances that we've made together and now seeing the work that we've made recently, it's like it's been beautiful to kind of watch us grow, watch our relationship grow. It seems like we're I want to do this gesture and then like this gesture. Something about like that we're feeling deeply connected and also blossoming in a beautiful way, and it's an ongoing journey.
It's also really great when you come home and you're like, babe, I'm so tired, and he's like, babe, I'm so tired, and you're like, do you just want to order takeout? Great, that's what we're gonna do. Can you get some wine? Great. It's like you don't have to sort of explain that. You're like, I'm exhausted,
Yeah.
And so are you. So great.
You did the same work together. Yeah. Nice. Cool. That sounds like a great place to wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing. All technical issues aside, this was such a lovely conversation. Thank you everybody else who came. And yeah, follow them on Holbart, I think is your handle for Hollis, right? Holbart, Holbart, and then Nattie Trogdon is
Natty Troggy.
Nattie Troggy. Yeah, follow them,
Yeah.
follow their stuff, and then yeah, and we'll see you next time. Cool. Have a
Thank
great
you so
day.
much
Thank you. Bye.
for hosting dialogues, and we look forward to seeing you all in person soon.
Yeah.
So much. So much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.